Today's headline is Christmas Past, how the festival was celebrated 60 years ago. Recollections of the Old Timer. The subheadline says, Improvised Methods for Increasing the Power of Powder. Later Day Incidents. It says, along back in the 30s, remarked an octogenarian, we celebrated Christmas with fully as much vim as at present. But the difference in 60 years is great. The meager facilities afforded, the primitive methods of the grandparents of the present generation, and the fact that we had but a single day of vacation made the festive occasion vastly different from more recent ones, when the youth have had at least a week for enjoyment. As a religious festival, it was then observed, as now, by the Catholic, Episcopal, and Lutheran churches as one of the leading events of the year, and the preparations for the observance were elaborate. The Methodists and other denominations held services Christmas morning. In proportion to the population, the church services were more largely attended than of late years. The churches of the city at that day numbered less than a dozen, and all of them were much smaller than now, and were scattered over a large territory. The services were usually well attended, especially those of the Catholic denomination. The younger portion of the community, however, left the religious services for their elders, the boys devoting their time to outdoor demonstrations. It was easy to impress the legend of Santa Claus with his pack-slaying team on the minds of the children, said the old resident. The weather, snow often covering the ground, and the capacious fireplace with its broad wooden mantle where the stockings could be hung, helped to make the illusion real. So rarely do we have the snow now, and so few the old-time fireplaces and wooden mantles, that it requires some ingenuity to make the youngster believe that old Santa exists. It made no difference how much or how little credence was placed in the legend in those days, for generally it was revered, especially in the German families, and Christmas Eve parties were so numerous that the absence of one to a neighborhood was sure to be remarked. These would generally commence late in the evening, 9 or 10 o'clock, after the children of the house had hung up their stockings and retired, and in a few instances, after midnight, people of the neighborhood would be called to see someone enact the part of the old saint. The night would be spent in dancing and in the playing of games, and the hours would fly so speedily that often those intending to attend the early church services were belated. Facilities for making a din. I came near forgetting the noise and din, continued the old man. I do not know that with your improved methods for noise-making you excel the noise of old. Then it was not only the boys who made the din, but those of larger growth vied with the youngsters, and with guns, flintlocks, pistols, and firecrackers tried to outdo them. Indeed, the spirit of emulation between the grown and half-grown led to some excesses, and in the latter part of the 30s, those intending to celebrate were admonished through the public print to do no mischief, but to act more decorously. As a sample of the behavior, let me state that at one house, where a party of young men and maidens were making merry, an outsider crawled upon the roof, and reaching the chimney, placed a piece of plank over the flue, and smoked out the revelers. Yes, we had some temperance people in that day, remarked the old gentleman, but they were in the minority. Chief Justice Cranch was the president of the Washington Temperance Society, but the great Washingtonian temperance revival had not reached here. In many houses, the decanter was usually on the sideboard from year in to year out. It is not therefore strange that at Christmas time, liquid refreshments were to be found in nearly every house, public or private. Indeed, houses were kept open, serving eggnog. Tom and Jerry and apple toddy were added to unmixed liquor, and were dispensed ad libitum. If perchance a total abstainer declined the social glass, he had a hard work to escape a taste of liquor, especially if he accepted a slice of pie, for in preparing the mincemeat our cooks knew but of one way to flavor it, and that was by a bountiful addition of good strong brandy. Schools of olden time. The schools of the old days, both public and private, enjoyed a Christmas holiday which was of so limited a duration that the grammarians among the boys spoke of it in the singular number only, the day in question, the 25th of December, being given was sometimes a half day on the prior date. Happy were the pupils when the 25th fell on a Friday, for there were 2 days following which they were not obliged to count as school days. Then, too, in addition to keeping up with their lessons, Christmas always prompted the teacher to drill the pupils in singing, dialogues, and declamations to be given together some evening during the week. The most enjoyable Christmas times, 50 or 60 years ago, were those when a copious fall of snow prevented the attendance of pupils at school, and was not sufficient to keep them off the streets when homes had lost attraction. In the latter part of the 30s, a number of gunners and fishermen had their homes in West Washington, and their hunting and fishing operations were in the neighborhood of Aquia Creek. These made a rule to return to their homes just before Christmas and early in the morning, each with a toy drum or penny whistle and with a plentiful supply of firecrackers, would march from one house to another, sampling the drinkables and usually setting off a pack of firecrackers. In the evening, continued the old boy, we had the American Theater to go to. It was then in full blast. This was on Louisiana Avenue between 4.5 and 6th Streets, the old Canterbury site. And there was in the Masonic Hall, corner of 4.5 and Louisiana Avenue, the old Columbian Museum, with Carusi's, now Kernan's Theater, at 11th and C Streets, the favorite place for balls. Though but one day was kept as a holiday, every evening during the week, these places were crowded, and many private parties took place. When the weather would permit, a fox hunt took place sometime during the week. The headquarters of the Washington Foxhounds were at Favier's, 17th Street and Massachusetts Avenues, and there were always one or more social evenings here in the festival week. It seems to me, remarked the old-timer, that the Christmas weather then was more seasonable than that we have had in latter years. The Christmas of 1839, I remember, indicated a lean graveyard, for it was the whitest kind of a day. A few days before the 25th of December, the snow fell to the depth of 10 inches on a level, and the railroad to Baltimore, as well as the stage road, was blocked, and for several days we were isolated from the rest of mankind. Nevertheless, the holiday was observed, and if the weather interfered with some, it gave others facilities for slang, such as Washington seldom enjoyed before or since. I believe that we then had one of the most seasonable winters we ever had, for there was so much snow and ice that when it broke, the long bridge was carried away. Christmas of 1836. Another old man, who was about 10 years of age in 1836, asked to give an account of his doings on Christmas of that year, remarked, "In the first place, you must know that with the Washington people, the day was made more of than even the 4th of July, and as I recall that when I was 10 years of age, more noise was made than now. The evening and night before, and the day of the 25th, was the length of the holiday season, and the boys crowded every conceivable species of fun and frolic into that period. Not boys alone, but our fathers too joining in. You may know that we had no such facilities as now. It was common to borrow a coal of fire from a neighbor when the old-fashioned tinder box, with its flint steel in tow, was not at hand, and to set off firecrackers we carried a piece of burning rope. Perhaps, continued the old man, my own experience of that day may interest this generation. We then lived near the site of the Post Office Department building and Patent Office on F Street, but the latter building was not then built, nor the present structure for the former. I remember the busy times at our house in preparing for the day, for there were 6 children in the house. We assisted in chopping the mincemeat, for it could not then be bought, as now, and it appeared that every housewife had her own recipe, and not everyone could build a satisfactory pie, and there were some too who would not attempt it. Then the ginger cakes were rolled out and baked. Children were early to roost in those days, and 7 o'clock found us in bed, after having hung up the largest stockings we could find. But having learned the legend of Belle Sniggle, ere day broke we were peeping into the stockings crammed with ginger cake, oranges, apples, with a levee, whip, or cartwheel scent in the toe, and toys, a wooden dog or lamb, or a stiff-kneed, paper-headed doll at the top. Hastily dressing, we were soon on the street, that is, us boys, making a noise. For this we used tin pans, horns, penny whistles, and the locust, the last a wooden rattle. For fireworks, we had the crackers, only to be bought through a colored person, who could give no testimony, for it was a violation of law to sell them. And I remember that some of the storekeepers sold a cent cigar for a levy, and gave the pack of crackers as a premium. And one old lady, thinking she could not afford the cigar, sold walnuts at a levy apiece, accompanying each with a pack of firecrackers. Ringtail roars. There were no cannon crackers then, but there was one about double the size of common ones, known from its loud report as the ringtail roar, and we also had one which, from making 2 reports, was known as the double-headed Dutchman. Then we had the toy cannon, often a piece of gun barrel. The favorite was the spit devil, made by wetting the powder with spittle. These were set off by the fire end of cheap cigars or burning rope. There were no blue lights and other colored fireworks then, but a few years later a druggist, who was yet gratefully remembered by scores of the boys of that day, prepared and sold chemicals for making other colored fire with the powder. We had our fun, but when dinner time came, the table found us in our places, and turkey, as now, was the principal dish. The afternoon was spent like the morning, but it was a long time before we ran down, and the following day there were no signs of Christmas to be seen, other than the remains of the firecrackers, some powder marks on hands and faces, and the remnant of turkey, the latter often utilized as the foundation for a pot of soup. Frequently, the visit of the physician to attend one guilty of excess or the victim of accident was a sequel. There were before Christmas, said the old resident, some fairs, the churches and some other societies holding them in Apollo Hall, the Perseverance Engine House, and other places. We had no Sunday school celebrations, no Santa Claus, nor trees, but with the juvenile parties we had enjoyable times. Old times in Swampoodle. Well, said one of the early residents of Swampoodle, between 45 and 50 years ago, things were as different in our section from what they are now, as were the wilds of that period from the paved streets and fine buildings of the present. There were but a few houses in Poodle when I arrived there in 1852, and while that name was applied to a little hamlet near the Tiber, between G and H streets, popularly the Poodle took in Tiber on the east and New Jersey Avenue on the west, and G and H streets, and 9/10 or over were natives of the Emerald Isle. It was so distinctively an Irish settlement that we were generally known and even called by some of our countrymen the Wild Irish. You ask how we celebrated Christmas. What could you expect but the old Irish style? We had our eggnog, Tom and Jerry, and other mixed drinks, but the real stuff was the favorite, and there was plenty of it. For the children, we had the stocking feature, and but few or any gifts were exchanged among the grown people. The first duty Christmas morning was to attend Mass, and so faithful were the people of that section that but few grown persons remained away from the early Mass at St. Patrick's. The return was made between 6 and 7 o'clock, and then the fun commenced. Breakfast was not thought of, but visits were made from house to house. In the use of gunpowder, we were very temperate, then not having learned American ways, but as to drinkables, we needed no teaching. For sport, we would sometimes have a row, resulting in a cut head or two, never anything serious, but such games as handball, jumping, running, and casting the stone were the pastimes. Seldom was there a ball or party on Christmas night, unless that day fell on a Saturday, for that was the popular night for what some called the shindig. A Swampoodle Christmas was enjoyable to the residents, and if there was any disorder in the camp, it was not known outside. When Know-Nothingism appeared, the men of Swampoodle had different experiences, as well as those of English Hill, for not only on Christmas days, but at other times, there were pitched battles between the belligerent forces. Incident of late date. When the police court was located on C Street between 4.5 and 6 Street, said an old reporter, Judge Snow held sessions Christmas mornings, at which the scenes were foreign to those outside. The judge, however, in the midst of an anti-festive surroundings for a number of years, felt happy in the possession of a letter received the night before, or on Christmas morning, which proved that in one case at least, his confidence had not been misplaced. A young man, having come in possession of his share in the estate of his father, several $1,000s, had run through it, and in so doing became what some of his relatives denominated a stationary tramp. That is, one minus the energy to go from place to place, but with all other qualifications of a hobo. Every effort was made to reform him, but in vain, and finally he was sent to the workhouse by the judge. Then his mother grieved until she became ill, and as the Christmas times approached, the family feared his enforced absence from the Christmas dinner table would seriously affect the mother. One of his relatives, with a reporter of the Star, called on Judge Snell, and after stating the case, made the promise that if he would be allowed to eat his Christmas dinner with his mother the following day, he would be sent to a western city to commence life anew. Judge Snell exacted a further condition, the taking of the temperance pledge by the offender, and Christmas Eve directed his release. When the young man was brought before him, the judge gave him some wholesome advice, and expressed his desire to hear from him that he was faithful. It is needless to say that one of the happiest homes that day was that of the widowed mother of the stationary tramp. True to the promise given, on the following day the young man left for the West, and the incident was well nigh forgotten by the next Christmas. Then came a letter in which the writer conveyed his best wishes for the judge, and related how he had found employment and had completely changed his course of life. It is unnecessary to say that this was one of the most prized tokens of the Christmas times in the judge's family, and as such letters were received from the same source annually, they served to keep warm the heart of a man whose surroundings were such as to incline him to steal his heart. Old-fashioned variety. The old-fashioned eggnog, says an old-timer, was different from the modern decoction as to ingredients and strength, for as I remember, it was more palatable, and 2 cups or glasses were sufficient to fill the ordinary man. In one section of the city, the custom was to make it in a bread pan and use whiskey, brandy, gin, and other liquors with plenty of milk and eggs, though the latter ran up from 10 cents to 50 cents per dozen in the 2 previous weeks, and spices, serving it hot. There's one thing I can say, though. It was stronger than the modern drink. There were fewer fights following its use, for the fighting quality was wanting. Modern-day Christmas gift. During Mr. Cleveland's last administration, he bestowed on a widow and family a Christmas gift appreciated more than all such they had received in their lives. A son, the youngest and the idol of his mother, through bad company, had found his way to the penitentiary at Auburn, New York, for a serious offense and had a long term to serve. A brother interested himself in the attempt to get a pardon, and finally secured an interview with the president, and left the case with him after urging the action more on behalf of the mother than of the boy. The day before Christmas, the brother was sent for, and Mr. Cleveland handed him the pardon, exacting a promise that he should take it to the prison and present it early Christmas morning. That morning, the young culprit received his freedom, and with his brother, was soon on his way to his home here, arriving in the evening to find the mother, brothers, and sisters ready to partake of the Christmas dinner. The next morning, attired in a suit furnished by the prison authorities, he went to the president's house to return his thanks, and sending his name roughly written on a scrap of paper, he was sent for at once. The president greeted him cordially, and when the young man thanked him for the pardon, the president seated him, and rising, gave him words of encouragement towards winning a name, and only asked that he should show by his conduct that no mistake had been made. The young man is now in the West, the last accounts being that he is doing well. This story came from the great District of Columbia, being reported in the Evening Star of December 23rd, 1899. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, now remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.